Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for tonight's pro game webinar, Create the Attack Development to First Team. In the chat box, there is a link to a Create the Attack National Teams webinar. So that's available to all the audience tonight. So that's there if you ever need it. My name's Ben Futcher. I'm an FA Youth Coach Developer, and I'm delighted tonight to be joined by Amy Price, who's a Women's National Coach Developer, Charlotte Healy, who's Manchester United under-21 coach, and Steve Haslam, who's the current Academy Manager at Sheffield Wednesday. Before we get started tonight, I'm just going to run through a few things with you. We want to make this tonight as interactive as possible. So there is a chat box function that we'd like you to use. And any sort of thoughts you've got around Create the Attack or any experiences that you've come across, feel free to put them in the chat box. Any questions for the panel, again, put them in there. And if we don't cover things in the conversation and discussion, we will look to kind of come back and answer some of those questions. Any technical issues or you need some IT support, again, put them in the chat box, please. And Laura Seth, who's in the background, our IT expert, will try and help you as much as she can. So just before I go over the webinar overview, we're going to run a little poll. So tonight, we just want you to put in first whether you're working the male or female game and what phase you're currently working in. So that's just to give us a little idea of who's in the room and to get a feel for the audience. So tonight, we are going to be looking at how teams in the professional development phase apply the principles of play to create the attack. We're going to be looking to gain an insight into how professional clubs develop individual and unit tactics and strategies. And we'll be looking to discuss approaches used to develop practices to focus on technical skills with small numbers in small areas. So we've got two guests on tonight from professional clubs. So we're really going to be looking at how these clubs develop their players in the PDP phase in preparation for first team football. So I'm going to hand you over to Amy so everybody can introduce themselves properly. Good evening, guys.
Good evening, Ben.
Evening, Ben. Thanks for that. So just the polls come in. We have a real mix, which is really cool across the boys' game, the girls' game, the men's game, the women's game at various age phases. So we hope the webinar will be helpful for everybody. Just want to hear from our guests now. So Charlotte, Man United Women's Under-21's head coach. Could you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you arrive at this role?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So I've spent 13 years now working in the talent pathway. Been lucky enough to work with some really amazing people who've gone on to have, I guess, amazing careers in football and away from football. So I spent 8 years working at Derby County, kind of learning my craft. I spent 3 years at Liverpool where I got my first taste really of work in the professional development phase, followed by a year at Manchester City doing their under-21s last season. And then came across to Manchester United at the start of last season, heading up their 21s programme and overseeing the whole academy programme. So predominantly, my role now is to produce players for the first team at Manchester United, and if not the first team, to support them in, hopefully playing in one of the top tiers across the country.
Lovely, thanks, Charlotte. And Steve, yourself as the academy manager at Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah, I progressed through Sheffield Wednesday's Academy, or Centre of Excellence system as it was back in the day. Managed to progress through the ranks there and play for Sheffield Wednesday's first team. I left at 24 and went on to play for several of the clubs. I transitioned into coaching while I was still playing. I've managed to work through each development phase, and I was head of coaching for a couple of seasons, and now I've been academy manager for 3 seasons at Sheffield Wednesday.
Brilliant. And I know, Charlotte, you just touched upon it there around your purpose in the PDP phase to produce players for Manchester United women. As there's probably lots of purposes, but that's probably one of the primary purposes. Steve, could you say to us, like, what's the purpose for you guys? Is it the same? Is it slightly different?
No, ultimately we're a football development programme. We're trying to prepare players for the rigours and demands of first team football. Obviously the wider purpose of an academy is to give people a positive life experience and give all the boys the fundamental life skills that you can be successful if they do transition out of the game at some point.
Brilliant. And I know that's the same for you, Charlotte, and I think that's going to come out in the next hour or so. So I'm just going to hand over to Ben now for the next bit.
Okay, yeah, we're just going to share this Create the Attack video with you. Feel free in the chat box to share with us what Create the Attack means to you with your players in your environment. Have a look at the video, make some notes. Over to you, Laura, to play the video, please. Okay, some really good examples of what Create the Attack can look like there. So tonight, we're going to focus on the in possession, and we're going to look at the principles of play of creativity, support, movement, create space, and penetration. So we're going to be looking at what Create the Attack looks like in a professional club environment in both the male and female game, and how both clubs use the principles of play with their players to create the attack. So I'm really looking forward tonight to kind of getting an insight from Steve and Charlotte on what it looks like for them in their environments.
So let's get into the nitty gritty then, Steve and Charlotte. Start with Charlotte. Would you be able to talk us through some of the principles, the team principles that you look to try and work towards within Create the Attack phase? It might be slightly different to the principles of play that we've just shown as well.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, Create the Attack is for the players. It's understanding what that means. And I think, for us, we're quite clear that we want to find ways to get forward. So, predominantly looking at players, can they be brave? Are they aware? Do they know what's around them? How do they get the ball forward? So, in terms of ball speed, sometimes that's speeding it up, sometimes it's slowing it down. And then the movement. So how predominantly do players create and exploit space? And if they don't need to create it, can they identify it and ultimately find ways to play forward and get the ball into the final third? So I think the key thing for us, and something we've really spent time looking at over the past season, is, how do we be clear and concise with what we want? I think that's really important, and certainly working with girls, in my experience, is that they're quite literal. So I think the terminology is really important. So I think first and foremost is understanding the club principles. So what does Create the Attack look like? I know obviously Casey did a webinar on the game against Reading the other week, and she spoke around those principles of playing with width, penetrating, playing forwards. That could be with the ball or without the ball, and ultimately recognising and exploiting space. So I think understanding the club principles and giving the players an understanding of how. So we talk about having a +1 mentality, making sure we're attacking height, width and depth, and making sure we've always got more than one threat on the back line. And we think that if we can do that as a team, we're in a good position to create the attack. So I think once the players have an understanding of what we want from them and how they might do it, we then allow players to be innovative and creative and understand how. So, ultimately we want them to be able to see pictures and make decisions and play the picture that they see on a match day. It can't always just be, the patterns that we want. So we feel like an understanding of club principles, the understanding of how, and then giving them the flexibility within that, within that framework to be able to go and execute. So in terms of how we would do that, I think the key things around the training practices are high repetitions in training, so they can start to see lots of different pictures. But ultimately within training, they have to be in a position where it's up to them to make the decisions. And, there's a lot of talk around structure versus chaos, and ultimately, we want to paint pictures in the session and then see, can they apply it and can they understand the decisions they're making? Because ultimately you can't cover every picture in a training session. So if they understand the why, it helps them then to make live pictures and play the pictures that they see either in training or on a match day.
Lovely. Thanks for the detailed answer. What I picked up from that was around flexibility. So yes, we have these shared team principles that we try to perform and create the attack, but we're flexible with it. We really want to promote understanding of players to be able to kind of choose the right option at the right time, I guess.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Steve, would you be able to explain to us a little bit about what it looks like in your environment in terms of create the attack as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar in terms of the concepts that Charlotte just spoke about there. I mean, we obviously talk about creating and exploiting space. We talk about a lot about playing behind teams, around teams, or through teams. And within that, how do individuals, units, and collectively, how do we find solutions that are in front of us? I think one thing that's key is to attack with variety as well. Because players will come up against different opponents, different formations, even within games, different strategies might be employed by your opponent, and therefore it's all about providing those pictures for the players to recognise and make good decisions to be effective.
So in your time as Academy Manager, having seen various teams go by in the PDP phase, does create the attack look different depending on what personnel you've got, in terms of those really talented players that have a real strong chance of making it into senior football?
Yeah, I think even at PDP level, at Category 2 level, which is what we compete in, you do see a variety of formations employed. 3 at the back with wing backs, natural wingers playing on their dominant foot side, inverted wingers, 1 striker, 2 strikers. So yeah, you see a whole range of different attacking sort of strategies employed.
Okay, could you talk us through the situation that you had a few years back with, I think you had like 2 exceptional wingers in your group, and how that situation might have tweaked or changed in terms of create the attack, how it might have looked slightly different based upon the players in your group? Yeah,
obviously, football is about playing to your strengths and trying to find solutions to be effective. So, your tactics and your strategies can absolutely be affected by the personnel that you've got. And if you've got 2, wingers who like to play on their side of the pitch and effective at getting down the outside of opponents and producing crosses, as a coach and a coaching team, we like to look at the strengths of our players and adopt strategies that they're comfortable and effective in doing.
Brilliant, thank you.
Amy, can I just ask a question on that? I was going to say, Steve and Charlotte, really, because in the PDP phase, how does that link into what the first team do? Because I'm thinking, framework and freedom is, do you have to teach them some sort of framework because the next step's first team where there will be some sort of framework, and how does that maybe affect the freedom that you want them to have? And I suppose it's a difficult one to prepare for the first team, giving them that freedom. I'm just wondering how you kind of go about that.
I mean, for us, particularly under 23 level, we try and replicate and mirror what the first team are doing, because the boys, once they get to under 23 level, they are very close to the first team environment. So it's absolutely key that they really understand what the manager demands of the players if they're going to make that next step. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we're similar. I think ultimately the team, we want the 21s to play with the same principles as the first team, the same terminology, and That's important, because if they step up again, what I'm asking them to be accountable for has to be similar to what Casey would want them to do in the first team. But I think ultimately at the 21s, it's giving them that freedom, like I said. So, if create the attack for us is to get the ball in the final third, ultimately the players have the freedom and flexibility of how they do that. But what we want them to understand is the principles of how we want to play, because we feel that it gives them the best chance of being successful in doing that.
Just jumping on, there's a question gone in by John. It's just saying, at the PDP stage, are patterns of play important to the player's development? So what are your thoughts on the patterns of play, Charlotte?
I personally like them. I think I understand why people think it can be quite rigid, but I think it goes back to what I previously said around it's creating repetition for players. I think if we're doing patterns of play, what's important is that there's opportunities for them to make plenty of decisions, and it's not the same monotonous pattern over and over where they become robotic. I think you can condition patterns. I think you can challenge players within that, and I think as long as they're having to make decisions and play live pictures. Personally, it's just my opinion. I like them.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think you probably want a balance, really. I can see the advantages of doing patterns. It develops a connection between your players and understanding, but you still want that creativity and freedom to make that create attack phase effective.
Brilliant.
Okay, so we're going to move on to in this phase. What's the typical problems and challenges that we face as coaches, as players? So this is to the audience, really. Like, start to populate the chat box in terms of when you're working with your team, and we might be in the create the attack phase. What tends to stop us from maybe progressing into that final third? And that might be relating to the opposition. It might be related to ourselves. But start to populate the chat box. And as you do that, I'm going to sort of pass that question on to Charlotte and Steve, in terms of in there, obviously coming from the women's game, Charlotte, and from the men's game, Steve. There might be similarities in terms of those problems and challenges. There might be differences as well. So, Charlotte, what's typical for you in this phase in terms of problems and challenges?
I wouldn't say it's a problem. I think the challenge for us is obviously the stepping stones of the pathway from RTT to 21s to first team. I think the game just looks so different. I think that was certainly a challenge that we found last year, that the players that had come through our RTC had spent the majority of their games dominating possession and dominating games. And what we found was that the game at that level predominantly is transitions. So they either just won the ball and they go straight away in attack. The ball turns over, they're back down the other end, and there's not a huge amount of control or patience or build up, and there's loads of factors for that. It's around risk taking when they're younger and they play on smaller pitches, and all those things go into the context of that. But I guess the key thing for us at 21s last season, we spent a lot of time, and this is in the build phase as well as create the attack, was kind of teaching players how to control games and be more patient. And there's people talk all the time, look forward, play forward, get your eyes up the pitch. But I think certainly for us, it was around, well, actually, it's not always on to play forward, and, the patience to move the ball and move the ball and move the ball, and then understand when to play forward. And, when they have played forward, then what do they need off their teammates to enable the ball to continue to progress? So I think, the tactical understanding of control and patience, and then also the movement. Now they're playing on bigger pitches. So, can they identify space? They might not have to create it. Or if they do have to create it, what do the double movements look like? Or, if they're moving out to in, into out, what that might look like. And then, of course, as always, it would be at this level, the technical capacity to execute that.
Lovely. Thank you. Steve, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think I won't say much is a problem, but something that we've been aware of at the club is just having attacking players that are willing to attack the space behind. And I think that for the coaches who are working with the younger boys as they're coming through, it's just being clever in designing your session so that there's space for players to actually run into space beyond the back line. That's not to say we're just a team that always looks in behind all the time, sort of thing, but just having that person threatening the back line is something that we've identified, and obviously consider that when we're putting sessions together. In terms of technical capacity, I think we've come up against situations with teams who defend deep in their own half, or even had a man sent off and retreated into their own sort of 40-yard defensive structure. And we've had problems breaking teams down in them occasions. And I don't know, sometimes there's almost too much passing and not enough dribbling and creative play to actually eliminate opponents and just pose questions. So I think from a mentality point of view, an issue can be players sort of playing a little bit too safe. So therefore, I think as coaches and the environment that you try to create is to, make it a trusting environment where you acknowledge that mistakes are going to happen, and you want players to be brave and really express themselves.
Yeah.
And in this creative attack phase, that's a good way of letting players have freedom.
Can I just jump on that, Amy? It's a really good point, Steve. I think in create the attack, when you go for them risk passes and you actually go and try and kind of penetrate defence, there is a high risk to give the ball away. So it's really important, I suppose, as coaches, especially in the PDP, that you don't want players giving the ball away, but you've got to kind of accept it if you want them to go and try things. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? You kind of don't want safe players. You want players that take risks and really go and try and unlock defences, whether that's a dribble or a pass. But I suppose, as you said, it's the environment that you create that makes them feel comfortable in trying that.
I think that's where you got to be careful with. Sometimes, obviously, your passing stats that your analysts might produce, because you might have a player who makes an unbelievably high, consistent pass completion, but that's only part of the picture. Where's he making the passes? Can he play forward? How many key passes does he make? Or is he a different type of player who actually carries the ball forward or dribbles past somebody or combines with teammates to break lines?
I think that's like a really good point around like confidence, creativity, and generally trust in your players, I guess, to make those decisions themselves in the right moments. Would you have any advice? This is directed at Charlotte. Would you have any advice for the coaches who are listening tonight in terms of how you might create that feeling of trust and sort of psychological safety?
I think it's, you've got to know what you're going after. So I think if we can say to players, okay, and create the attack, this is what we want from you, this is ultimately what you're accountable for. It's then as coaches knowing, well, we want players to dominate 1v1. We want them to take players on. We want them to try passes that take 3, 4, 5 players out of the game. So it's knowing you get that wrong. So I think, that they'll get that wrong and give the ball away. So I think it's, making sure that you're not always praising the outcome, you're praising, the efforts, and you're seeing pictures that you're asking them to deliver on. And something I think is really important is that we're always going to give the ball away. So they'll do it in training and they'll do it in a match day. So, okay, you've given the ball away. Now what? So, you've made a mistake, you've lost the ball, whatever, no problem. Now what's the reaction? So if the next phase of create the attack is to counter press and win the ball back, then what does that look like? So yes, it's not create the attack, but they've lost the ball. So it's focusing on the next bit and making sure that the reaction is positive. And ultimately, if they win the ball back, great work. You've absolutely done your job. And I think, it's creating a safe environment where players know what the coach wants. They know the framework, but they know that they've got the flexibility to try and deliver it. And ultimately, they're not going to get a rocket if they give the ball away. Actually, if they give the ball away and win it back, they're going to be praised for that.
It must be really tough, guys, because you've got that focus on individual player development and trying to really support players in their ability to become senior players. But you've also maybe got that element of like winning games and as a team being able to do that effectively. So I don't know, Steve, if you've got any thoughts on that, or from your experiences, what you've noticed in terms of how to balance and how to manage that conflict sometimes.
I mean, as you move through the pathway, obviously it's all about development, but as you move through the pathway, I think, we want to be competitive at the older age groups, and I much prefer to talk about a winning mentality rather than winning. And that can be sometimes different to the end result, which is just one measure of how you performed. I think we're always trying to look at the bigger picture of how individuals have performed and how they're developing, and sometimes just looking at results from a team point of view is not always an accurate guide to that. Although, like I do say, we do want a winning mentality and a competitive spirit amongst the players.
Yeah, I think we're exactly the same. At under 21s, ultimately, it's about teaching players how to win games. That's the level that they're at. So, when we're talking about, creating the attack and players having confidence and the decision making that they make, I think, yes, you take all that into context. But I think at 21s, for us, certainly it's a huge point in their career where they learn about game management. So, if they're 1v1 and we're 1-0 up with 3 minutes to go and they give the ball away, that's a poor decision. But if if it's a different state of the game and they're trying different things, then it's the appreciation of that. So I think game management plays a huge part of that as well.
Brilliant. And somebody's also mentioned in the chat box around the idea of being organised defensively when we're in possession. And I think, Charlotte, you touched upon that just now, but I guess it links into this idea of like your team, like the responsibility of the team and the what next, and like, not needing to be creative in every single moment.
Yeah, I think create the attack looks different for different individuals within your team. For wide players and strikers, it's different to central midfield players or attacking midfield players, fullback and centre halves. The create attack team the create the attack phase for the team looks totally different to them. Hopefully, you'd be thinking they're anticipating a turnover in possession and making sure if they're not supporting the in possession bit to recycle possession, they're getting ready and prepared to deal with any changeovers in possession.
Brilliant. Thanks guys.
Excellent, guys. Some brilliant insight there. So I think it's important now. We're going to kind of almost start with the end in mind. So we're going to show you some short clips of Man United women first team and Sheffield Wednesday first team of just what create the attack can look like in that first team environment in the first team games. So we're going to show you that. Make some notes in the chat box. Anything you see, any observations. Then we're going to try and link that back into individual players and what the guys look for with their players.
As we approach the middle of this second half, got to be fairly impressed with Brighton's response. They've not got into the game as an attacking force at all, but they've managed to hold firm. They've certainly grown into the game in a possession sense. United on the charge again though, and Galton. Here's Harris. That's going to run for Nuyu, and he's brought Reach into it, and Reach's pass will be finished off here to finish off the game. Sam Whittle ensures that Wednesday have won it all tonight.
Bending it into the path of Lauren James. Opportunity here for James, and you know what comes next.
Brilliant. I think them clips show the different types of create the attack and what it can look like. I think you can have create the attack can be slow build-up play. The ball speed's important when it's slow. Then the kind of when a player picks up the speed to hit that penetrative pass. Then it can also be when the balls move very quick, very early, a bit like the Sheffield Wednesday goal, 3 passes and it's a goal. So it can look very different. So just for the audience, if you can put three key player attributes in create the attack that you look for in your environment, then I'm going to come over to you first, Steve, and say what key skills do you look for in create the attack? What are the key kind of individual skills and attributes that you're really looking for in your players?
Yeah, you're looking for obviously receiving high quality receiving skills under pressure, being able to take the ball away from the defender or into space. The vision and awareness to see the pictures in front of you, and then the technical quality to execute what decision you've made, whether that's a short pass, a long pass, a pass with disguise, a dribble, a 1v1 skill against an opponent, or a longer lofted pass, etc. So yeah, they're the main core skills that I think run right throughout. Obviously, positionally, looking for slightly different traits as well. Midfield players to receive the ball and be able to play forward. Same with fullbacks, if they're receiving the ball, can they receive it and move the ball forward? So yeah, slightly different skills from different positions. But the generic skills are what I would imagine most of the audience are going through now, which is obviously receiving skills, vision and awareness, and then technical capacity to execute what decision you've decided to do.
Brilliant. I'll ask you the same question, Charlotte. What does that look like for you, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think similar. I think receiving and deceiving skills, so being able to drop a shoulder and manipulate and get away from players. I think an important one as well is being able to carry the ball. I think the influence of different managers in football over the years, I think people almost think the number 6 is a pass and move and sit and spray, but I think if you look at some of the best players in the world, it's their ability to carry the ball and beat a player 1v1 in the middle of the pitch, with whether, it's pressure from in front, pressure from behind. So, yeah, I agree with Steve. I think the receiving and deceiving, I think, being able to manipulate the ball and play off 1 and 2, but also being able to carry it and beat a player.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? I think you've both mentioned there the importance of dribblers. So, you can move the ball and you can pass the ball, but someone who can actually move the ball and dribble with it and run with it, that's kind of, that individualism, that's really important to create the attack, isn't it? Do you find you have many of them, Steve, in your academy, people who can actually get on the ball and run with it and go and create things on their own?
I think in football you're always wanting more. So we've got some like that, but you're always demanding more. And I think probably the best players, and we're trying to create elite top level footballers, are probably able to do more than be just a passer, or more than be just a dribbler or a ball carrier. They can excel in different scenarios, because like I mentioned at the start, being able to have variety to your play and variety to your attack is important, because of the different scenarios that you face in terms of what players you've got, but also what defensive strategies your opponents might employ.
Brilliant. And I'm watching them videos of the first teams of Man United, women, and Sheffield Wednesday. I want to come to you, Charlotte. What are the big skill gaps that you think under 21 players are missing when you watch the first team and you're kind of linking it and you're kind of comparing it with the first team players?
I think there's always going to be the technical gap. I think, from 16s to 21s to first team, that jump is huge. So, you could argue that there's an awful lot of gaps, and ultimately that's our job to, help fill them in. But I think, similar to what you said, I think players who can really dominate and carry a ball, I think, over the years they've grown up, and it's a lot of it has been pass. But I think if we're at the stage now where we're saying, we want players to dominate 1v1, and we want wide players to be able to be players with skill, not just because they're quicker than them. When they come up in international tournaments and they're playing against players quicker than them, what are you going to do now? How are you going to beat them? So I think certainly the ability to, if you're a 6'8" or 10, and you can carry the ball and beat players in the middle of the pitch, but then the wide players as well being comfortable coming inside and outside. And so from a technical point of view, I would say that. I think from a psychosocial point of view, I think it comes back to what I said previously around decision making, bravery to get on the ball, understanding of what decisions to make from a game management point of view. But I think physically is always going to be a huge concept. I think, we talk about create the attack, but there's always a bit before it and there's always a bit after it. So the bit before it might be, okay, we want to expand quickly, we want to cover 5 lanes. It's the physicality of players to be able to do that quickly. If they can't do that, then what does it look like? And, ultimately the bit after, which I mentioned, if you give the ball away, the ability to go and press and counter press and win the ball back, knowing your first press won't win it, your second one might not, and your third one might not. But if you don't do it, you might control the whole game and then get done in behind and lose the game. So I think we talk about create the attack in a moment, but I think it's the bit before and the bit after that we have to look at as well when we're looking at, gaps in areas of development.
Brilliant. It's a really good point you made, because I think we've talked a lot about the technical and the tactical side of create the attack, but around the other 4 corners, the psychological side of it, the physical side of it, what sort of impacts do you kind of look for in that, Steve, within your area and your teams?
Just repeat that again. Sorry, Ben.
Just saying, we've spoke a lot about the tactical and technical, requirements of the player. What about the psychological requirements, the physical requirements in your game? What do you look for in your academy with them, in them sort of areas with the players?
Yeah, I think psychologically, again, you're looking for, real resilient, tough sort of boys who can sort of bounce back from setbacks. And I think quite often, as a coach, you can help them on their journey, but the environment they're in plays a big part as well. And, we've seen over the last number of years that players who get exposed to the first team environment, whether that's in a training environment, in our own first team match environment, or it's a loan period, that period sort of accelerates their development a lot.
No, brilliant. And I think once we look at players in this area, I think someone's just put on there, it depends on the state of the game. So you're almost looking for players over the years to have developed a toolbox with a variety of skills. And for me, one of the biggest skills a player can have in the PDP is knowing when to use what technique and skill at what point against what opponent. So Charlotte, I'll come to you. How do you teach these sort of things with the players?
I think it's game understanding. I think, what do we want from them? How do we want it to look? And then it's them understanding the why. So, why do you want us to attack like that? What does it have to look like? And then once they know that, I think you can allow them, the creativity and freedom to try different things and do what they want to do. But ultimately they have to understand the game and understand, is it the first leg of a cup tie? Is it, the second game of a European Championship? There's always going to be different scenarios. And I think, speak about scenarios, I think there's a huge, way of building that into your training program. I personally really like scenarios. I think you can manipulate training sessions to try and replicate and try and apply some of those pressures. Ultimately, it's never going to be the same as I guess the pressure of a match day, but yeah, I think it's definitely, knowing what it is that they're going after, but then understanding the concepts of managing different periods within the game.
Brilliant. So, Steve, I'll come to you. If you were taking a player into the PDP phase at Sheffield Wednesday, would there be any non-negotiable skills that this player would have to have, say, a midfielder in the create the attack area? All your players will have, they must have good, certain skills. Is there anything you particularly look for?
Yeah, it's for us, it's the technical side of it. If a player's got real sound technique, yes, that can be developed even at that age. But it gives any player at any level, at any age, a great platform to be effective and successful if they've got real good technique. And I don't just mean, sort of competent technique. I'm talking outstanding ability to deliver the ball over varying distances with disguise, receiving it under pressure, playing clever play in the final third or in the middle third to create your attack. So that's always a fundamental aspect that what we look for, but every player is different and we're very open-minded on that. And we like to look at the strengths of players and work on those a lot and make those even stronger rather than, trying to focus players on maybe areas that maybe not so competent at.
Brilliant. Do you feel, Charlotte, we do enough work on the individual? So we're talking about individual skills and all these skills we want. Do you think we do enough coaching in the PDP on the individual player, or do you think it drifts more to more tactics and strategies and game plans?
I think it depends on the club. I can't answer for the whole PDP. I don't know, but certainly in our club, it's definitely individually focused. And I think the importance of players having IDPs and coaches and players being connected in that and making sure that the whole MD team know that. So, when you are planning a session, that the players within that session have the opportunity to work on, the strengths and areas highlighted in their IDP. I think that is your job as a coach. So it might not be, I'm not saying you do unit work every single session, but I think, you might develop a technical practice that works on, if it's your 9 being able to dominate 1v1, if it's your 7 and 11 creating and exploiting space, if whatever's on their IDP, I think as a coach, it's your job to make sure that, players have the opportunity to practice that and measure their success within each session.
Brilliant.
Okay, so we're going to kind of follow off on that track that you just mentioned there, Charlotte, around strengths, and Steve, you mentioned it too. So I guess where you've got a team where you've got players with various strengths. So if you're thinking about create the attack, you might have a 4 and an 8 who have distinct strengths but different strengths. You might have someone that's very good at playing long diagonal balls compared to someone else who's just really good in really tight areas, one touch. So how do you manage that, Charlotte? Because obviously you spoke there about the importance of focusing on strengths, and as did Steve. So how do you make the most out of everybody's strengths in terms of how you set up to play as a team in this phase?
I think first and foremost, it's players knowing what their strength is. I think that's really important. And I think it's then having an understanding and an appreciation of other people's strengths in the team. So, if we're creating the attack, like I said, you might have a player in the middle third who, a 6 or an 8 who is really, really good at carrying the ball and beating players. But you might also have a 9 that's really good, dominating a centre half 1v1. So ultimately, the job of that midfielder in that moment is to get the ball into the final third. And if you've got a centre half who's 1v1 with a 9 who's 1v1 with the centre half, your job in the midfield isn't to beat 3 players. It's give the ball to your mate, because that's her strength and we've got you and you've done your job. So I think it's an understanding of their roles and knowing what they're accountable for. And yeah, definitely around, knowing each other's strengths. And I was listening to a podcast the other day actually with Anson Dorrance on, and he spoke about the word he used was fusion, around utilizing everybody's strengths and coming together as one team. And I really like that, because I think, I hear a lot around people working on their weaknesses, but and that's important, of course, but ultimately you're never going to have a whole complete player. So for me, like when I'm watching players, you watch hundreds of players a season, and what you're looking for is the X factor. What are they really, really good at? What makes them stand out? And I think that's really important, that players have the opportunity to really work on their strengths and make it as strong as they can.
I think there's something in there as well around like educating every individual around like not just themselves but like their teammates. How often do we make that really explicit, I guess, in the way we coach and how we interact with players in IDPs, in sessions. So that's a really interesting bit of food for thought, definitely for me anyway, moving forwards. I love that.
I think on that, Amy, as well, it's asking the players, like get the players to ask each other. I think there's so much value in that. And, we talk about the holistic development of players having to give and receive feedback. And, we do a lot of workshops, but certainly getting the players to ask and receive feedback and advice and, coach each other when we're doing, create the attack, get the centre half to tell the 9, what makes it easy for her, what makes it hard for her. When we're working with the wide players on double movements, ask the fullback, how can I get the ball here? And having those conversations in training, because, I think they're really, really valuable. It's not just the coach that coaches.
Yeah, and that links into a good question that somebody's asked in the chat box around 1v1 battles. And I can just imagine that peer-to-peer feedback working brilliantly in like one-to-one battles. You could actually like stop the battle and like actually tell your opponent, actually, you made it really hard for me when you did that, or I find it easy when you do this. That's just really interesting to hear from a player's perspective from your teammate. So that's really cool. So Steve, I've got a question for you in relation to like the relationships between players in this phase. What would you say is the best relationship you've seen in your time at Sheffield Wednesday?
Yeah, I mean, let me talk about 3 midfield players that we had in our under 18s a couple of seasons ago, and they were all complemented each other. And I think Charlotte's right, and what you've touched on there is that the connections and the relationships build up over time, but it's quite often just led by the players very subtly. And good players also find a way of working with other good players as well, and recognizing each other's strengths and how are they going to play together and be effective together. The only thing I'd throw in is that sometimes in development football, you're always looking at the individual, and we're trying to stretch the sort of high flyers in our academy. So quite often, our high flying young players might play up the age groups, and therefore, the question and considerations for us as coaches is, do they lose, connections with certain individuals who they may have played with for 2, 3, or even more years. So, if that player doesn't perform quite as well with a different age group who are older, again, you've got to factor that into your sort of mindset as a coach.
What's your advice then with that? Like, because it sounds like for a player to really, thrive at senior team level, they need to be able to play with anyone, like against anyone, but with anyone as well, because, things change. So what's your advice to the coach in terms of helping players to be able to play with effectively like anyone?
Yeah, I think through the development pathway, whatever topic we're talking about, it's great to give lads different experiences, and giving them experience of playing in a different team next Saturday. As a player at some point in the future, they might sign for a new club or go on loan, or have a new manager who employs a different strategy. So they're going to come up with this scenario in the future. So my advice to coaches would be not be afraid to obviously stretch your better players and challenge them, but also support them at the same time, and be a coach, talk it through with them so they understand what is happening, and you're sort of facilitating that they're learning.
I think that's a really appropriate bit of advice, like given the fact of the stuff Charlotte's going to speak about in a moment around positions. So like, Charlotte, talk us through your view on how you help players in the PDP phase to be able to be like versatile and experience different positions.
Yeah, I think when players come up to the PDP, I think some players will have a set position. I think they will have the attributes of a specific position, and they will be comfortable playing there. But I think other players will be, in a place where they can play a multitude of positions because, they have the technical capacity and the physical capacity to do that. So I think, we're really strong, and me and Casey speak every single week around what is the right thing for the right player at the right time, and that is predominantly like our meeting every single week is what does each player need at this moment. And I think certainly, if you look at wide players, I think you might have a player who, is a fullback, but we're looking to develop their, offensive work. So you might play them as a wide player for a bit. You might have a wide player that needs to develop their defensive understanding. You might play them as a fullback for a bit, and it might also be for an appreciation of the relationship with their other player. So it might not be that they need to develop in that aspect, but it might be they need a better understanding and appreciation of the role the person in the unit above them is doing. So I think that's really important, and I also think certainly in terms of positions for players involved in the international setup and players in and around the first team, that I think you would do well. And it might be different in the male game, Steve, but certainly in the female game, I can't think of many players at all who've broken in from 21s into first team and played down the spine of the pitch. That's such a trustworthy position to play. And, certainly attacking players that you see brought into a first team environment, they're often brought on in wide areas. So, your job as a PDP coach is to make sure they're comfortable and they understand the roles and responsibilities of playing in that wide area, as well as the principles of what the team are going after. And the same from an international point of view, when players go away for the 17s, Euro tournaments, 19s, the World Cup and World Cups and everything else that they go through in the international age groups, ultimately, the national team coaches can only pick, 20, 25 players. So if you are a player who, understands the concept of different positions and can apply yourself in different positions, I firmly believe that you give yourself a better chance of being in that selection.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Sorry, can I just jump on that? It's a really good point, Charlotte. And I know in the male game especially that it's really important you give players different experiences in different positions, because a lot of top players, they might actually make their debuts in the first team in different positions that they end up. So for me, it's so important that they understand different positions, they understand the different roles. And you might have seen that, Steve, in Championship football, that I'm thinking of people like Steven Gerrard, who maybe, started at right back at Liverpool, and John Stones at right wing back at Barnsley. These top players, these are top players, and they're making their debuts out of position. So it's so important as coaches that we give players the experience of different positions and give them all the kind of the techniques they need to go and master different positions on the pitch. And a player who breaks into a first team and hopefully they're going to have long careers, if they have a 10-year career, they might play for 7 different managers. So they need to be able to adapt and understand the different tactics and have the kind of the toolbox to be able to deal with that. Have you found that, Steve, at all at Sheffield Wednesday over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we talk about, the word that you just mentioned there about the toolbox, giving the players all the tools. So, if at some point in that player's career, a manager wants to play in a certain style or a certain system, he's got that well-rounded education from a technical, tactical viewpoint to go and be effective in that situation. But you're right again, and touching on what Charlotte said, over the years, talented young centre backs quite often, start their initial period at first team football in a fullback position, and it might take a period of time before they sort of evolve into what's probably their natural position. But again, each player is different, and some players have got real specific skills that you can attribute to a position. Some players have got more generic qualities, and you're not quite sure what position they're going to be suited to or when they might settle down. And some players might be sort of multifunctional right through the career or for a good portion of the career. So again, I think it's really important to be open-minded when you're looking at position of players, because obviously things can change.
So how does that work, guys, then, with like positional profiles? Because I know like a lot of the coaches on the call will probably have that within their clubs. Maybe general to the game, or they might be specific to each phase of the game. So Charlotte, is this something you guys have? And if so, like, how are you flexible with it? Like you said at the start around, we have these flexible team principles and we want to expose players to different positions and situations. So how does that link into your positional profiles for this phase?
Yeah, I think it's important to have, an idea of what we're going after as coaches. I think when you've got, an under nines all the way through to a first team, I think it's important that coaches have an understanding of, what each position might look like in each phase. But I think it is an idea, and I think, when we don't use it to release players off, or to criticize that they're not doing this and they're not doing that, because they're never going to be able to do everything on that profile. But what it does do is create conversation, and it might be a prompt for a coach that, okay, we're looking at her in a wide player, in a wide position, and this might be areas off here that she's currently not great at. This might be something that she's really good at, so that might be then what we focus on for IDP. Or it might be, if you're looking through the profiles, actually, do you know what, when I really think about this player, she might be more suited to play this type of position. So I think it's an understanding of, okay, this is a concept of what we want in these areas, but it's by no means used to pigeonhole players.
I'm intrigued, because I'd say both of you so far have spoke mostly around, really capitalising on what the players can do, and making multiple super strengths, so to speak, within the players. At what point would you look to potentially, actually, we need to focus on this as a weakness? This is something that you definitely need to become better at, because I guess the reality is that PDP, going into senior football, the opposition will pick you off if they can notice something in an individual which they can exploit and end up sort of gaining advantage and winning the game. So, Steve, at what point do you kind of give in and focus a little bit on those weaknesses, or do you not?
I think what I'm trying to describe is the balance of how we approach it. Is we look predominantly at what they can do rather than focusing wholly on what they can't do. So, yeah, it's absolutely our job as a coach to improve all aspects of their game. And you're right that, we talk about areas of development. I think it's important the language you use. We don't talk about weaknesses or things they can't do. It's areas to develop. And quite often, as coaches, that's never going to be a super strength for that individual player, but you almost try and make that area of development invisible so that it's sort of not seen and not exploited by the opposition. But again, as coaches, it's your job to improve the players. And yeah, we may have spoke not accurately about it in terms of, we do have a strengths-based approach, but it's not we wouldn't be doing our job if we weren't also looking at that player, from every sort of viewpoint, and what extra things can we improve and develop.
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about the points you made around needing to recognise one another's strengths in order to create these really strong relationships and connections and create the attack. So I might know that Charlotte likes to receive the ball in a certain area on a certain side in a certain way. So I play to that. Would you say then, Charlotte, it's the same with me understanding the areas you're not as great at? Do I avoid them? Do I avoid passing the ball onto your not so strong side, or should I be doing it in terms of taking responsibility for helping you to become a better player as well?
I think ultimately it's around, players understanding their strengths, but understanding the areas they need to develop. And I think, we have a huge, opportunity to use analysis software. So, that's something that we utilize a lot to pick off what players are doing well and areas that they need to improve. They get individual clips, they get personal and individual feedback. But I think the key thing as well is that they understand what their strengths are and what their areas of development are, but also each other's. And I think there's a lot to be said, what Steve was saying there around, if you've got a fullback who, likes to come inside the pitch, you might have a wide player that, really makes an effort to be that player that gives the width. So it is playing to each other's strengths, but I think ultimately you can only play to each other's strengths if the player has a belief and a confidence in themselves. So I think that's on the individual players to decipher, where are their teammates at? Are they in a good place? Are they full of confidence? Do you need to have a little word with them? There's so many, I guess, variables in terms of what that would look like. But certainly, I think something that we would always work to is that players know each other's strengths and areas that they're looking to develop. And then ultimately, it's the environment as a coach and players that you create that allows players to either, play safe and play to their strengths, or, if they're full of confidence, you often see players, try and be more creative and try different things.
Love it. Nice one, guys. Thank you.
Brilliant. That leads us nicely into an individual learning plans. And what do they look like? So I know Steve's got some kind of detail on this, and he's got an example of what it looks like at Sheffield Wednesday. So I'm going to ask you, Steve, to start off with, what is an individual learning plan, and why do you use them?
What is it? It's really a framework for and a guide for the player to guide their development. If you can just flick onto the next slide, I can probably talk it through with the audience. So this is something that we do right at the start of the season with the players. Ignore some of the detail because it's just an example template I'm using, but we ask them to sort of, it's very much player driven. Again, looking at strengths predominantly, but areas to develop if required. More often than not, the players show good self-awareness and are aware of what they're good at and what not good at. But sometimes as a multidisciplinary group of staff, you have to nudge the players in the right direction as well. But yeah, we like to, sit down with them, talk about their career goals, what's their goals for that particular season, and then get a bit more specific about their game. So as you can see there, they will come up with their own performance goals. And then underneath that, the how bit is how are you going to achieve those performance goals. This is reviewed throughout the season and updated if necessary, but we don't, a player's development plan doesn't change that much. It's generally, it's done 6 times a season, reviewed, and it's very rarely changed in the course of the season. Each player gets given a mentor as well, either a senior member of the academy staff or even a first team member of staff. Will have a number of players in the professional development phase to mentor throughout the season, and that can be, on-field tactical stuff or technical stuff, or it might be off-field stuff to sort of mentor the boys. And it's just a framework, like I said, for the boys to refer to and guide their development.
Brilliant. So what I'm going to say is, I'm looking at this, Steve. So would the first team players ever come into this? Would you ever kind of use for example, one of your midfielders? Would you ever kind of pair them up with a first team player and then get them to go and watch them in a first team game and watch the skills and the techniques that they have and almost kind of try and mirror that?
Yeah, we're very lucky at Sheffield Wednesday because we've got a relatively small training side, but we use that to our advantage because we've got really good integration with our first team. So our sort of under 18s, under 23s in and around the first team on an hourly basis during the week and on match days and stuff. So that's a great learning thing for the young boys to see the senior players, how they conduct themselves, how they perform, how they prepare. We've also done some workshops this season, for example, where we've had a midfield player out of the first team speak to midfield players in the under 18s, 23s. We've also done things with late developers and had a sort of late developers workshop where, again, a senior first team player who sort of followed that path. What challenges did he face, and try and just pass on his experiences to the young players. And we find again that obviously having a different voice to the players and someone who they look up to, there's real value in that as well. Brilliant.
I think it's really important that that players who have maybe not experienced first team environment, that they go and feel it. So if they're around it, they're near the first team players, the speed of a first team session, the tempo of it, I think people can talk about it, but it's very difficult to feel that realism of it for the younger players until they go and really get close to it.
Yeah, and that's what I touched on before about the environment that they're in and how it accelerates their development. We can coach the players to play with greater ball speed, to press with more intensity, etc. But they have to do it when they're facing bigger, more physical, better decision makers, technically more competent sort of first team players. And like I said, we've found that the environment that the players in will accelerate their development.
Brilliant. So with the ILP, Steve, when might you do these around the training, and what part of the week and what days in the week would you look to kind of implement these plans with the players?
Yeah, we've got specific slots in the week, but we see it as very much sort of self-directed learning. So there's always opportunities for the players to go with a bag of balls or some colleagues or speak to a coach. Can you work in the afternoon? Or it might be a sports scientist or an analyst. So it's very much self-directed. We make them accountable and responsible for it. There is set slots in the week where we might do real specific individual and unit work, but like I said, it is a program that we like it to be sort of self-directed learning, really.
Steve, can I just jump in there with a question?
Yes, of course.
So around progress towards achieving these goals, I'm guessing the player will will evaluate themselves, but also in line with their mentor, with their coach. Have you ever
Yeah.
experienced any situations where there's disagreement in terms of the progress they have or haven't made? I'm just touching upon someone's comment in the chat box around.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a bit of an issue with young players that we've found is they're not quite aware of the level they're playing at and the level that they need to get to. And to be fair, you can excuse them for that because they've never played first team football, so they don't know what it's like and they don't know what it takes. And you know, quite often as a group of staff, you know, we have to have honest conversations with lads and just, you know, explain the standards that they need to reach if they are going to get to first team level. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of honesty and clarity around, you know, what we expect and what they need to do to get to the level that they want to play at.
Yeah, nice one.
Brilliant. How does that look for you, Charlotte? So we've heard Steve in the kind of Chef Wednesday. What does that look like for you at Man United?
Yeah, very similar. We try and have, you know, or meet with the players every 6 weeks, and very similar. So they'll set 5 targets. A couple will be on their strengths, a couple will be on areas that they need to develop. And the other thing that we would look to do is build in if they have an international IDP, is build that into their IDP as well. So they don't have a club and country one. It would just be one that they work from. And they're very clear on, you know, the key things that they're looking for, and where we then look to measure and evaluate that. So, you know, we utilise our analyst. She will create a report for the players after the game, for the international players, of, okay, if this was, you know, a target on your IDP, you know, here's the measure of it, here's how you did, which gives them a good, you know, I guess, visual of what that looks like. But to be honest, watching the game back, you know, players could do that themselves as well. And there's some players we have who are not in the international setup, but would still do the same thing for themselves. It's, you know, and it shows, I guess, their accountability for their development.
But I suppose, going back to you, Steve, it is as much as kind of the coaches are in charge of what the players do and the learning, but to become a pro player, you've got to take responsibility yourself, haven't you? And it's probably the player's job as well to recognise what they do need to work on and really put the time and effort in. And you can sometimes see when you're in around clubs, the players that really want to go and push themselves and make them better. Would you agree with that?
I think
absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Charlotte.
No, I was just going to say, someone's asked a question in the chat around how do you work on every player's IDPs in every single session? And the answer is, you know, your job as a coach is to facilitate a practice that, you know, encapsulates those key points. So when you've met with your players, you know, okay, you know, my wide player is looking to dominate 1v1s. My centre half needs, you know, a better understanding of how to build and when to play forward. So, you know, it's your job as a coach then to put a session on that gives them the opportunities to do that. But, you know, very similar to what Steve said, it's player driven. You know, our girls don't have that extra time where they can have, you know, another session in the week or session in the morning. You know, we have 4 sessions a week and they're all team-based sessions. So you have to be creative. But I think ultimately it's around your session and practice design to incorporate what your players need.
Brilliant.
Just
Steve?
to add to that, Ben, there's a really interesting question related to feedback. So just interested, I guess, in terms of what you might have noticed, Charlotte, in terms of how's the best way to give feedback to the players you work with in terms of the female game, and maybe might be similar or different from Steve's perspective in terms of the male game. You said before, Charlotte, about players sometimes being literal in the women's game and really wanting to know the why and really wanting to be attentive to and thorough and attentive to the information. And I just wonder if that is true and if it's different for Steve.
Yeah, what I would say is I'm still learning. I think, you know, every player wants different things, and I think it's important, first and foremost, you understand how your players learn, how receptive they are to feedback, and, you know, not how best they take it, but how best they can take it on and deal with, and then you know, adapt and hopefully then apply the principles better of what you want moving forward. But I think the key thing for me is being honest. Certainly the work our analyst does with the data after a game helps because you can show them. But I think ultimately the analysis is key. It's, you know, they get their individual clips, and I think until they can see it and you can talk through their clips and, you know, you get them to feedback what they're seeing and what they're thinking and what they're feeling, because ultimately, you know, we're allowing them to play with freedom. I've said it, we've got a framework, we're allowing flexibility. You know, I might not have seen something and they might be trying something that hasn't even crossed my mind. So I can't just, you know, dismiss that without asking them what they're seeing and what they're thinking, because it might be the right idea. And in that case, you know, it's a different conversation. So I think certainly having that conversation with them, but, you know, if it is wrong and it's not what we're wanting and they're not applying the principles, then it is being honest enough to say that, because, you know, I say it all the time, but you shouldn't, you know, a player should know where they're at throughout the whole time. It shouldn't be every 6 weeks when they have a one-to-one or at the end of the season if they're released. I think the feedback is critical for players all the way through the season.
Brilliant.
How does that look with you, Steve, in the male game?
Yeah, in terms of feedback, you know, we like to be fair, honest, and balanced as well. You know, I think everybody, when you mention the word feedback, they suddenly think, oh no, you know, it's a negative that we're talking about here. It could be positive feedback. And you find that, you know, if you are trying to deliver sort of constructive feedback, should we say, you know, in my experience working with players can get a touch defensive about things. And again, it's how you then deal with that situation and try and create that sort of psychological safety for the players that, you know, it's different for players now. You know, when I was growing up, no games got filmed. There wasn't stats on this, that, and the other. Now, you know, the young players, there's a lot of demands on them, and every action they make is scrutinised. So I think, you know, as a coach, you've got to have, you know, empathy and show that you care. And like I say, if you can deliver feedback in a fair, balanced, and honest way, I think the players appreciate that, because, you know, they appreciate the honesty and that you're there to help them. You're not there to do anything other than just help them on their journey. Brilliant.
Excellent, guys.
Cool. So Charlotte's going to talk us through a little bit in terms of how she plans for a session within Create the Attack. Just before you go into that detail, Charlotte, how do you look at the different phases of the game in terms of across a longer period of time? How do you expose the players in a balanced way or in a reactive way to whether it be Create the Attack or high press or whatever it is?
Yeah, I think, like I said at the very start, it's knowing what you want. So whether that's your personal principles or the club principles, is knowing, okay, what does, you know, in our situation, what does Manchester United look like in the build phase? What do we look like in Create the Attack? What do we look like in Finish the Attack? And I think having a clear understanding of what we're going after throughout the season. So, you know, it links with terminology, it links with the game model, and we give players the exposure they need across those different moments to develop their understanding. Should they then, you know, go on to play for the first team or go and play for, you know, a different team, they have a broad understanding of the game. I think what I like about that model is that it makes us not be impulsive. So if we lose a game on a Wednesday, we don't then, you know, coach defending a low block for the next 4 sessions because we've got beat 3-0. I think it's really important that we're not impulsive at the development stage, and we see, you know, the game as exactly that, a development opportunity. But within, you know, the way that we plan the season, it also allows us to be flexible for player needs. So, you know, whether we're winning or losing games, if we're consistently struggling in one moment, it does allow us then the flexibility to cover that and support the players with what they need at that time.
I think that's really, really key, isn't it? Because sometimes, like, what and when you coach is sometimes the first and most critical decision before you get into how you're going to coach it. So I guess just moving into the first part of your session. So in terms of a Create the Attack type of session, talk us through what you've got down here and why, Charlotte.
Yeah, a couple of things first. I think it's understanding what day we're at. So we have 4 sessions a week. So depending what day we're on will depend, you know, what we do on those days. Saturday for us is our large area day. So that will be the session where we look to do some match pace training. So it might be, you know, 3 lots of 4 minutes that are at match pace, as an example. We also have to consider my staff team, so what their roles, responsibilities will be. So linking in with the physical performance coach to know the timings on and the exposure the players get to each part of the session. It's, you know, the analysts feeding in on the Friday to make sure, you know, we're not going to do a week of match prep, but what we can do is stick to our framework, but drip feed information in for the game that's coming up. And again, you know, working with my assistant to make sure that we're clear and we're up to date on player IDPs, and they have the opportunity to work on what they need to work on within the team theme of the session as well. So in terms of this session, again, just an example of what a create the attack session might look like. So, we start with duels because, we want players to be able to dominate 1v1, but I think the outcome is important that players know that, what are we going after in this session? Sorry, I think it's important staff know as well as players, what is it that we're going after in this session? So the first part of the session, so the top left picture, 3 little mini progressions. So, first one, 1v1, is literally receiving pressure from in front, pressure from behind. Can the player manipulate, beat the player and put the ball in the opposite goal? The next one might be that you play in, it's set, and then it's that player identifying, is the space in front, is it in behind? So starting to look at the principles that we're focusing on, and then building into a 1v1 up to a 5v5. So underloading it, overloading it. Can players start to see pictures and play what they see in terms of creating and exploiting space, creating overloads, and then the movement to do that as well. And I think in these sessions, it's knowing what success looks like. So, for year 7 and 11, I said it earlier, we want players that can come infield and outfield. So, it's putting them on the outside of this practice, but encouraging them to come inside as well. For the 4, 8 and 10, it's deciding when are you going to carry the ball? When are you going to pass the ball? When do you need to stay on the ball? What's the decision that you make? So they start to see that already within the first 15 minutes of the session, different principles that will apply to them in the create the attack phase. The next part of the session, so it's what it looks like. It's just an 11v11, but a technical practice. So the blues would work one way and the reds would work the other. And I said it earlier around conditioning. So condition technical practice, what we'd say is the back 4 have to be on the halfway line to score, and they can't tackle, but if you intercept, you attack to goal. So again, it's players having to adapt in the moment, see live pictures and play the picture they see. And the idea behind these constraints is, I spoke earlier about the bit before and the bit after. So if we're saying to players, okay, we're looking for you to create the attack, our back 4 in the create the attack phase, when we're building through, we want them high up the pitch, because if we lose it, we want them to win it back. So it's the back 4, even though they're probably not the dominant players in the create the attack phase, getting into good habits and the pictures being realistic to what we want. So I spoke here again around, creating, exploiting space, the control and patience now. So, you can't tackle, but if somebody's blocking your pass, just keep the ball, identify that's an area where you can't play forward.
Charlotte, just
Yep.
on that. So how much emphasis do you place on the opposition in terms of them becoming, really good at making it hard for the other team to create the attack, for example? And how does that work with the staff and, and also linked into the opposition that you're likely to play in your next game?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this part of the practice, it would just be conditions. So I probably wouldn't manage the opposition massively. If you can step left and block a forward pass, then great, but it wouldn't be hugely. I want all the players to understand the principles of what we're going after. So it just goes, back to forth. It allows players, what it does as well is, before I coach any patterns in there, it allows me to see what players know. I'm coaching the principles. Okay, I want you, success for us in this part of the practice is to cover 5 lanes, because we want to play with width. So who does that? What does it look like, and why are you doing it? Can you get, when you're creating the attack, 2 threats on the back line? And the back 4, can you make sure you've got security behind the ball? That's what success would look like for us in this practice. So once they know the framework, it then allows me to see, okay, what do the players already know? What movements have they already start thinking about? Because they're probably more creative than I am. They might see things I don't see. So I want to see what they know before I then go in and start showing them different patterns.
So would this be quite flowy, like not much interventions, not much stopping, just let it play?
Yeah, it would be exactly that. And it might be that, myself and my assistant, we just go in and we do a bit of drive-by coaching. We speak to the number 4, okay, can you demonstrate bravery and awareness in this, go and get on the ball. What can you see? Working with the 8 and 10, can you identify opportunities where you can run beyond the back line? Can you identify opportunities where if the wide player comes inside, you go and give the width? So you're just starting to paint little pictures for them, but you're not constricting them to have to do something that you want them to do. Mm-hmm. Just move it on. Okay, so the next part would be the possession, a possession box. So you could do this again 11v11, but I've took 2 players out. So I took 2 wide players out, and the greens are, they act as both a fullback and a wide player. So in terms of the practice, it's directional. So the reds, for example, would work from bottom to top, and the blues would then swap after 10 minutes. So I spoke earlier about conditioning. It might be, right, you're 2-0 down, you've got 10 minutes to go. Can you score 3 goals? Something like that. Once the ball goes to the next third in this game, so once the 4, the 5 and the 1 have played into the midfield third, the goalkeeper plays another ball in. Once the midfield third transfer the ball into the final third, the midfielders can play forward and another ball comes in. So by the time the ball's in the final third, there could be 3 footballs on the pitch. So we spoke earlier around, the structure versus chaos. What we've said is if possession turns over, you play to an outcome. So again, the blues, it's playing the pictures you see, reds reacting. Can you win it back? Or actually, have you got another ball coming in? So it looks messy, but it's live pictures and it's players having to make imminent decisions, playing exactly what they see in that moment. So what I've said is in terms of the greens in this practice, so the goalkeeper will play out. And again, working with the 5 and 6, to get to create the attack, they have to have built up and got the ball there in the first place. So we're looking at the bit before as well as the bit after. Obviously, the main consideration is in that midfield third. But once the ball goes into the 4 and 5, can you find a way to get the ball in the midfield? The fullbacks, we've said, can drop to the bottom of the box. Now, for me, I would then allow my fullback to come inside and create that overload. We spoke earlier about the +1 mentality. So can you identify when you can come inside and create the overload? If the fullback comes inside, what does it look like with the midfield 3? How does that change? If they can get the ball into the midfield third without utilising the fullbacks, can those greens receive the ball at the top half of the box? If they do, they can drive into the attacking box, create a 2v2, or they can combine off the 9. Okay, if the 9 comes short, can the 8 or 10 go beyond and replace the high? So they're not locked into areas. There's complete freedom in terms of where they go. But, for the 5 and 6, it's can you get your eyes up the pitch and make a decision? Because once they've played one ball in, they've now got to be patient before they play another ball in. They've got to keep possession of the ball. So they've got to learn to make better decisions when to play forward. The 4, 8 and 10 in the midfield third, they've got to play forward with a purpose, because if they turn the ball over now, it's going to be chaos because the blues are attacking and there might be 3 balls on the pitch. So it's understanding for them, having control and patience and picking their right time. And like I said, the game's 10 minutes long, so they might only score 3 goals in that time. So it's being patient enough. It doesn't have to be like the technical practice that is back and forth, because that game would be a game of transition. We don't want that. We're trying to create the attack. We want to get the ball into the final third when we can. We can work with, the 9, if that's the 9 who's really good at dominating 1v1. Can you get across your centre half? Can you find open channels to play? But it's the patience to build, because that for us was a key area that we wanted to focus on.
Listening to you speak there, Charlotte, I think definitely what I've taken, and probably the coaches listening and Ben and Steve, is I think you have a real clarity around what you're looking for. And I think that's a real good starting place for a coach, isn't it? A really good fundamental thing. We're doing create the attack, but what is that? What does it look like in terms of the relationships between players, as an individual, in different situations? And that's what I got from that. It's just such clarity over what I think
it's experience, Amy, as well. I think, I've definitely been in that place where I'm trying to coach something and I don't really understand it myself. So I think it's, you're never, ever going to perfect it. But for me, it was understanding, okay, these 5 principles on the left-hand side here, that's what Man United want. That's how we want to play. So the key framework for me is, okay, can we have a +1 mentality? Can we have depth, width and height? Can we threaten the back line? And can we secure behind the ball? Because I think if we do that, we've got the best chance of being successful in that phase. But it's also understanding these are highlighted green, orange and red. You're not going to get everything out in one session. So, in this practice design, you're not going to be able to threaten the back line because of the dimensions of the pitch, or it's very unlikely that you will. And you're not going to be able to secure behind the ball because once the ball goes into the midfield third, another ball comes in. So that's okay. It's understanding, you can't cover everything in one session, but it's making sure what you do go after you get out. So I know by the time I finish this possession practice, I want to make sure the players have a clear understanding of the +1, of making overloads and utilising depth, width and height. And then when we go back into the 11v11 and we add those 2 extra players in, now we've got more space. So now we can threaten the back line. Now we can secure behind the ball. And ultimately, I'm looking at, can players apply the principles of what we've just worked on into an 11v11? So they might not have to create their space now, but can they see the pictures to exploit it? And I think when you then go into a big area, if they're clear with their movement and they can identify and exploit the space, you can start to see now, are they good at the game, or have you just taught them to be good at your practice? Because I think that's sometimes the case as well.
Yeah, I guess that's that element of realism that comes into how you set up, the area, like the people in the area, the spaces, the dimensions, like what you're wanting them to actually do in the practice as well.
Yeah, I think the best way to do that, to be honest with you, is speak with the players. If you lifted the dotted lines up off that pitch, it would be an 11v11 game. But I'm not saying all my sessions look like that, because they don't. But what I will do when I'm doing that session, I might speak to my number 4 and what do you think? And she'll tell me, I don't ever have this much time. You might have an 8 or 10. I can't get on the ball, and that might just be because she's not doing the right thing. But it might be because my session design's not right. So that then is giving me a problem that I have to look, is this realistic? And for the players, does it feel like it feels on a match day? And if it doesn't, how do I condition it or change it to make it feel like that?
Perfect. Nice. That's really good information, Charlotte. Thanks for sharing that with us. I think we're about to move on to sort of the end of the webinar now.
Brilliant. Excellent. Some really good detail in there, Charlotte. So we're going to one of the final slides is preparation for senior team football. And we've spoke a lot around what the players need technically, tactically, and some of the session design and the ILPs, which is great. So, Steve, I'm going to come to you now. You were fortunate enough, you played for Sheffield Wednesday in the first team, and you've played in a full house at Hillsborough. How can you prepare the players for that? How can you prepare the players for what's awaiting them and at 30,000 at Hillsborough when they actually hopefully make that step up into the first team?
Very difficult, because it's obviously a unique environment they're going into. To have that number of people and the noise at match day and a full stadium creates, it's very difficult to replicate that. Obviously, some players go on a loan move, which might be almost a build up to that, debut at sort of Championship or Premiership level, where hopefully you got a full house and stuff. But yeah, it's very difficult to prepare. You can talk to players about it, but until they've been in that environment, they don't know. As coaches, we're always talking about communication, the importance of communication. But again, speaking from experience, a full house anywhere, you can't hear your teammate speak who's 10 yards away. Yeah. So quite often, if there's a lull in the game and the crowd are a bit quiet, or an injury, or you might have a chance to speak to a teammate, or quite often it's just subtle, gestures with your hands or your face to, make each other concentrated and give feedback to each other. But yeah, it's just a totally unique sort of environment, really. And, you hope that young players go into that environment really energized by it and they could perform in the arena, and sometimes, young players struggle and are overcome sometimes by nerves and anxiety a little bit. But, again, in that situation, we'd try and help the players through that situation, because it's quite a normal reaction to feel like that potentially.
Yeah, it's like when we talk about skills and the technical skills, but if you give the ball away, and you're playing at Hillsborough, I suppose, in front of 30,000, we're talking about bravery to get on the ball. That is a real test. We talk about create the attack, which is probably an area where you could potentially give the ball away more than others. That is a real psychological test, isn't it?
It is. It's a real test of your sort of psychological resilience, and are you brave enough to go and get on that ball again when you've just given it away twice, in a key area? So yeah, like I said, it's a unique environment, and a lot of it's about the players, the individual player, learning on the job, so to speak, of how to overcome that and how to deal with it, and who at first team level is a role model for you in terms of how they deal with it. And sometimes a young player might choose to copy how a different player deals with situations in that environment. Yeah,
and I always think when we talk about the preparation for senior football, it's a games program, and it's something. How do you, again? And I'll go back to you might have to, in the Championship, play 3 games in a week, and it's almost preparing players physically to be able to do that, whether in any position. That is a real tough job for a coach in a PDP, isn't it?
It is, again, speaking from experience, playing Saturday to Saturday is a totally different animal than playing Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. So what can you do in the PDP? I think it's your games program. Can you try and, replicate the volume of games that a first team may experience during the season, but also you've got to take into account that players are still developing physically at those ages, and you don't want them to suffer injury through a congested fixtures program. But we do try and during the course of the season integrate midweek games into our under 18 players, so they do get experience of playing that sort of Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. But we wouldn't do that too often during the season to not make them fatigued and suffer injury. But again, it helps to build up their resilience and prepare them for hopefully what lies ahead.
Yeah, and Rory's put in the chat box, you have to impact the game as a young player when you break into the first team. And you do, and I'd agree with that. But I suppose your job as the PDP coaches, or your coaches within the academy, their job is to kind of equip the players with the toolbox and the tools that give the players the best opportunities to go and make that impact, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Again, whatever club you're playing for, and particularly once you get to PDP and above, it's about being effective. And for each different player on the pitch or different types of player in the same position, they're all different and it can affect it in different ways. But yeah, I think when you go and make your debut and that initial transition from sort of professional development phase into first team, I think that's fair. You've got to try and make a positive impact. It's one thing getting there; you want to stay there, because that's what you need to do if you're going to have any longevity in your career.
Brilliant. I think that's something we've looked a lot at this year in terms of your role in the team. So, at 16s, ultimately, if you're, one of the high flyers in the international setup, you get a lot of game time. So, this season I've got a squad of 20 players. You can only pick 16 on a match day. So already you've got 4 players who aren't even in the squad. You've got another 5 players on the bench. So you've got 9 unhappy players who are used to playing 90 minutes every week. So, we've done a lot of work on, okay, what is your role in the team in this specific moment? Are you, a starter where you have to go on and execute this and this? Are you an impact player where you come on and change the game? If so, what does that look like? How do you do it? And if you're not in the squad, what is your role? What do you do? How do you bring value to the team in the lead up to the game in training, on match day and then beyond match day? And that was something that we've really had to work on this season.
Is that linked into the character development stuff, Charlotte, from Man United?
Yeah, I think, ultimately we've got, our job is to develop, individuals. It's the work around self-development and character development is really important. We have an external wellbeing coach who does an awful lot on, players' confidence and, their well-being. And for us, well-being is the foundation for performance. So, if we get 1 or 2 players into the first team, I think that that we've done really well there, but we can't have a program that services 5 or 10% of the players in it. Ultimately we're about the holistic development of players and people. And if they don't get into Man United's first team, they leave, a more experienced, better person who's able to, be more confident and express themselves. And, hopefully that gives them the foundations to go and have a good career, whether that's on the pitch or off the pitch.
Brilliant. So we're just going to summarise now. I'm just about on time with 2 minutes left. So I guess thank you so much to both the guests. I think you've been absolutely fantastic tonight. Personally learnt loads from the process. I just wanted to also say thanks to the coaches, by the way, because we've noticed the chat box has been pretty active throughout, and we've tried to integrate your comments as much as possible with the coaches tonight on the call. So I guess, Steve, would you be able to just give us 1 or 2 key points to summarise Create the Attack in the PDP phase?
Yeah, I think from a coaching point of view, it's knowing where they're aspiring to get to. So knowing the requirements at first team level, and knowing what takes there, and really having an open mind as a coach. A lot of developments about the individual development, and each player is different. And I think having an open mind as a coach and working with that individual is absolutely key in that phase. Hopefully, help that player on their football journey.
Brilliant, thank you. And Charlotte, from yourself?
For me, I think as a coach, but when you're designing your sessions, know what it is that you want and know what you're going after, and ensure the players know what the principles you're going after are, so they know what they're accountable for and what you expect of them. And then, you know, when you're designing your sessions, make sure that, you know, you're giving them freedom to be creative and innovative and try different things. And I think the best way to do that is through, you know, making sure your sessions are repetitive and players have the opportunities to make decisions in them. Your pitch geography is right. So what you're asking of them looks like it does on a match day in the areas of the pitch that it does with the right opposition. And then, yeah, just making sure that it's realistic in every way possible. And if you're not sure, ask the players, because they'll definitely tell you.
Love it. Thank you so much. We've been asked to remind you guys that there's some special FA Cup webinars coming up on Thursday, I want to say. Tomorrow and Thursday and Friday, I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, on that. So I think the links have just been put into the chat box for the coaches listening to click onto and find out more about. So yeah, again, thank you so much to the coaches listening for you know, interacting with Charlotte and Steve, and thanks again to Charlotte and Steve. Is there anything from you, Ben, just to finish off?
No, I thought it was really insightful. Some fantastic detail of what it looks like in both the men and the women's game, in the PDP, and how they try and kind of bridge that gap to the first team. So just want to thank the panel. You were absolutely fantastic. In chat box has been brilliant. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and thank you for joining us.
And the webinars, I got it wrong. They're actually tomorrow and Thursday. So the FA Cup webinars tomorrow and Thursday. We got there in the end. Have a look, see if you can sign up. Thanks, guys.